Not only has it been a pleasure to be part of this group for the last couple of days, but also since my membership, I've had the opportunity to share all the email traffic, which is just absolutely fascinating and reflects the diversity of backgrounds of people here. I think all of us, though, had one thing in common. A friend of mine sent this cartoon, and I have it framed in my home. I think all of us, in some ways, felt and feel like the women in this cartoon, that in some ways, Bertrand Russell was responsible for the way we viewed the world. And in my own case, his activism was really an inspiration to many people in my generation. As an undergraduate, even before I began my my undergraduate training, I partly chose Haverford College not only for its intellectual reputation, but because some of its faculty were known anti-war activists, and in those days, the peace movement was not so much anti-war as against nuclear testing and in favor of nuclear disarmament. I didn't appreciate until much, much later how closely Bertrand Russell was connected to these tiny Quaker colleges outside Philadelphia. He often joked when people accused him of being anti-American, he would say, "Nonsense, half my wives were American." Well, he could just as well have said, "Half my wives were graduates of Bryn Mawr College," which was the sister school to my own Haverford. Alice graduated, I think, in 1892, and Edith in 1922, but both distinguished Bryn Mawr graduates. As Ken has sometimes shared with us, one of the formative experiences for him was the Cuban Missile Crisis, which people of our age experienced as really threatening nuclear war. And it was, this is just a John Kennedy press conference during the Cuban Missile Crisis, but I think it kind of captures in its black and white TV images the way we learned about world affairs in those distant days. And of course, as an undergraduate, I went to a demonstration. I vividly, we're in the time of the World Cup now. I was playing soccer at Haverford, and I had to go to my captain and say, "Excuse me, I'm not coming to training today. The world could end if we don't go to this demonstration." So off I went. So I went to my vigil, and then a few months later was just fascinated to learn that while I was at my demonstration, Bertrand Russell was cabling the Kremlin and the White House, trying to persuade Kennedy and Khrushchev to back off from their brinksmanship. And that really gave me a different sense of Russell's role in the world as of 1962, 1963. In the summer of 1963, I went to a conference at Princeton and picked up for 15 cents a pamphlet, which Ken has in the archive, published by the Student Peace Union in New York City, reproducing all of Bertrand Russell's letters in early 1963 to the New York Times, and including in this little 15-cent pamphlet, a letter from Russell authorizing this pamphlet's republication of the letters, and there it was, his home address. So I went back to school in the fall and wrote him. I was fascinated by what he had said in his letters about Vietnam. They emphasized atrocity, napalm, jelly gasoline, chemical warfare. This is long before any of us had heard about Agent Orange and what it inflicted, not only the ecocide on Vietnam itself, but the terrible effects on American troops there that affected a whole generation. So I was fascinated by what he had written, and I wrote him a letter just asking for where could I find more information? And this was my fancy letterhead. I was the chair of the Student Peace Union of Haverford and Bryn Mawr. And again, I didn't know that he even knew these places existed. But I wrote him on September 25th, 1963, and he wrote right back. Here, I was 18 years old, and I get a letter from Bertrand Russell. You can imagine how that made me feel. Well, over the next few years, the war was escalating. I was more active about the Vietnam War, as was Russell. I wrote an extensive essay, which is fledgling Peace Foundation, published along with a shorter essay that he had written. So this came out in 1964, and we had this lively correspondence over the next couple of years. He and Edith Russell were active. This is 1965, talking about, I think this is when he tore up his Labor Party card. But they're very, very active about the war, following it closely, as I was. I had a next door neighbor, somebody who was a childhood friend who was conscripted, sent to Saigon. And we, there was no other way of communicating in those days. We didn't have faxes. We didn't have email. So we just sent airmail letters to one another. And he was working for the Army newspaper, Stars and Stripes, in Saigon. And he sent me a flimsy thermofax copy of a picture of an American soldier with a South Vietnamese soldier, and the South Vietnamese soldier is holding in each hand a decapitated head of a suspected Viet Cong. So it was a visceral issue that I shared with Bertrand Russell. So as his fledgling foundation was getting established, the idea of an International War Crimes Tribunal became a central objective. Significant people of arts and sciences had published their broadsides against injustice dating back to when Russell was in his 20s. But this was a different conception. This is more than what Zola was doing with the J'accuse. It was more than what Russell and Einstein had done with their manifesto leading to the Pugwash conferences. His idea was something that only Bertrand Russell could hope to implement at that period, to bring together eminent people of the arts and sciences, not just to sign a declaration or a petition, but actually to work together for weeks at a time to examine evidence of what was going on in Vietnam, and to see evidence that was just not otherwise available through the eyes of the Western press. Russell had compiled his own writings from this early period, 1963 to 1966, published in early 1967, called War Crimes in Vietnam. He had no doubt in his mind that what he was documenting from press accounts, largely in those days, was criminal. The violations of the laws of war, violations of aggression and so forth. And so he wanted to document this with an international tribunal. And I was fortunate, just as I was completing my undergraduate degree, to get an invitation to come and join the foundation and work on this ambitious project. So I did so in 1966. And again, only Bertrand Russell could hope to achieve this. It was something that was going to cost a huge amount of money. The Russells contributed enormously to the funding that was needed. And in most cases, to solicit participation, all it took was a letter from Bertrand Russell. And just like the kid at college who got a letter from Bertrand Russell, people were pretty impressed to get a letter from him. And if he asked for something, they responded. However, there were a couple of people of stature who needed a little bit more than that. So the most prominent people who were invited were Simone de Beauvoir and Jean-Paul Sartre. They had to be respected and invited differently. I didn't have other responsibilities at the foundation at that time. I had just arrived. I was only 21 years old, but I got sent to Paris. Why me? I think it's because everybody else was busy. But also because I was an American and because I had written about the war, I could speak about it fluently in English. I'd had a couple of years of French in secondary school, and when I went to see Simone de Beauvoir, it was a bit awkward trying to converse, but fortunately, her English was about as good as my French, and we made ourselves understood, and she was very welcoming. She was eager to hear exactly what Russell had in mind for this War Crimes Tribunal, how soon it was going to start, how much time would be involved. And one observation that I've shared with others here already is that one striking surprise was that here's this formidable, the most formidable feminist of that era. When she began responding, she would often speak in Sartre's name. She would say, Sartre agrees with Lord Russell about such and such. But she was warm, hospitable, and ultimately, when the tribunal was meeting, played a very dynamic role. I thought of her as an old woman at the time, and now I've changed my perspective. She's actually the age of my older son. The world looks differently. Of course, Sartre and Beauvoir had a long involvement in social justice issues, particularly anti-colonialist issues. They had been to Cuba, interviewed Fidel Castro and Che Guevara extensively, and they were eager to be part of this Russell Tribunal. We not only needed their personal support, but our original plan was to hold the tribunal in Paris. And so we needed an infrastructure there. And I spent much of the summer shuttling back and forth between London and Paris, where another director of the Russell Foundation, Ken Coates, whose name is familiar to you, I hope, had many contacts. And we built that secretariat in Paris that we also needed. So we had prominent people, we had funding that the Russells were a big part of. We had an infrastructure for where we would hold the tribunal. What we then needed also was a big challenge. We needed the cooperation of North Vietnam in two ways. We needed their support for our independence. That is, we didn't want this to be easily dismissed as a typical Communist Front political enterprise. We wanted to be able to choose people of diverse political views. Russell wanted people who had, of course, firm opinions about the war, but not from any kind of political orthodoxy. And we needed to be able to send investigative teams with the same kind of independent qualities into North Vietnam during wartime. And that kind of cooperation from North Vietnam was really an extraordinary ask on our part. And England did not have any official representatives from North Vietnam. It had a couple of people who were there on visas that called them journalists, and they were very supportive. But there was an official North Vietnamese representative in Paris, and he was a little more skeptical because he had close connections with the French Communist Party. He wasn't so sure about these brash Americans like me, and more so Ralph Schoenman. And so there was a tension as we negotiated in the course of that summer about all of these issues. And finally, we reached an impasse. We couldn't settle it in Paris, and Ralph Schoenman and I then went to North Vietnam. In those days, Air France had regular commercial flights to Cambodia, and we flew Paris, Athens, Cairo, Karachi, Phnom Penh, a very long flight, nearly 24 hours traveling in the air. And when we landed at the airport, we learned that there had been a shakeup in the Cambodian government, and they were not admitting any Americans. So here we are, exhausted, and we're just going to Cambodia so that we can get to North Vietnam. And we pled our case, argued and argued and argued. We're not the Americans that you're trying to keep out. We're critics of the U.S. intervention in Southeast Asia, et cetera. And finally, one of the officials said, well, actually, we know we have some American friends. And if, in fact, you two are friends of Cambodia, your names will be in a book that we have here at the airport. Now, how many of you read the Khmer script? I didn't either, and of course, they had as much trouble with our script as we do with theirs. So they found the book, The American Friends of Cambodia, and looked and looked and looked and looked, and we had nothing to lose. They were ready to send us away anyway, but they said, here it is. We found your names. Well, they were both names that started with S, and so we were happy to say, yeah, okay, yeah, you found us, terrific, and so then we had to go on to North Vietnam. There were no commercial flights whatsoever. This was during a war. But the International Controls Commission, set up in 1954 to enforce the Geneva Accords, flew once a week to all the capitals, Saigon, Phnom Penh, Vientiane, Hanoi, and an old cargo plane donated by the French. And you could get space on that plane. It was just an old propeller plane. And when I say space, I mean space, not seats. This is where you sat on your luggage. So if they had room for you, you could get on that flight. And that's how we got to Hanoi in 1966. So our negotiations continued there, and again, reached a kind of impasse. We had many of the same discussions that we'd had in Paris. And finally, without any explanation, we were told, well, we're going to settle this. And we were taken by car to a new location, and there was the President Ho Chi Minh, a man who had incredible presence, spoke English without an interpreter, listened to the arguments from the two sides, and said he appreciated everything that Lord Russell was doing, and he had to respect Lord Russell's judgment about what would be most effective. And so he ended the impasse. He decided in our favor that we would have the independence that we had been requesting. So it was really an extraordinary meeting. But then we had to get back in time for the meeting which Russell had already invited people to attend in London. And to do so, we couldn't risk that cargo plane again. Didn't always fly. Sometimes it was canceled and it didn't always have room. So to be sure that we could get back to London in time, we took an even more challenging route. Going home, we went Hanoi, Nanning, Wuhan, Beijing. This is in the days of the Cultural Revolution. And then on to Siberia, Irkutsk, Omsk, Moscow, and boy, did they go through our bags in Moscow. Who are these people? But we got home in time for the tribunal, where Lord Russell welcomed Sartre, Beauvoir, and many of the other members who ultimately served on the tribunal. Russell then, as you know, had a press conference in London a few days later. The meeting of the tribunal was on the 13th of November of '66. On the 16th, Russell met the press in London for the last time. He read a statement about how he had come to conceive this tribunal. He didn't take questions, and it was his last press conference in London. From that point on, Bertrand and Edith Russell spent their time entirely in Wales. So we were ready. We had built this infrastructure in France. We had the permission to send investigative teams to see the targets that were being bombed in North Vietnam, to choose the members of the team. They didn't have to be reporters from the communist press of Western Europe. They could be people that were vetted by Bertrand Russell and his foundation. So all then went well. We sent our investigative missions over the next few months, and we were set to go. And I, again, traveled back and forth between London and Paris frequently, and suddenly I wasn't allowed in. There I was in this rose gallery on the window where the passports were stamped, along with on the left, a then notorious French-Algerian lawyer, Jacques Vergès, who was actually of Vietnamese heritage, but he represented many militants during the Algerian War. Moise Chambe, not exactly anybody that we had anything in common with, but he was the head of the secessionist movement in the Katanga, died a couple of years later in Havana. But they wouldn't let any of those people in, and that really signaled that de Gaulle is not friendly to our enterprise, and that was quickly confirmed. He wouldn't give visas to anybody that we wanted to bring in. So we had to be flexible, change plans completely, and I flew to Stockholm to meet with Peter Weiss, the distinguished German playwright, then at the peak of his career with the production of Mar Assad in London and New York, where it was a sensational success. And he was just a down-to-earth person who, through all his reputation, into supporting our effort to move to Stockholm. We had a colleague who was an Asia scholar, Peter Limkeko, longtime friend of the Russell Foundation, and in a matter of weeks, they put together the infrastructure comparable to what we had had in Paris, and we were able to hold our sessions from the 2nd to the 10th of May in Stockholm. I'm not going to talk about that because we have an expert on what happened at those proceedings, my wonderful friend from Uppsala University in Sweden, who will be the co-presenter of this session. And it was my pleasure to meet her here after years of correspondence as she worked on her dissertation about the tribunal. Here's what it looked like. If you've ever been in first grade of any school anywhere in the world, you'll see that people are seated alphabetically. It goes Anders, Ibar, Basso, Beauvoir, Carmichael, Dellinger, et cetera. I mean, it really was that organized. And I'm visible somewhere in the background. I was there, and Tony was joking about, which side of your head was your hair parted on? In the case of Bertrand Russell's photographs, well, mine was parted on the other side in those days. This is what the tribunal looked like. It was a very businesslike commission. Sartre was the executive president, Vladimir Dedier, the Yugoslav historian. In the middle of this photograph was the chairman of sessions day by day. David Dellinger on the right had been a leading American pacifist and was a big force in the United States anti-war movement. But Basso, Beauvoir, Peter Weiss, Ali Kasuri from Pakistan, it really was a distinguished international group. And of course, the Vietnamese delegation got to share their evidence for the first time in the Western world, to bring people who were actually maimed by napalm, cluster bomb units, et cetera. And again, this is something that Leila will cover shortly. So the first session succeeded in Stockholm. And as I mentioned, the Russells were not coming to London any longer. Russell sent him a welcoming message that was read on his behalf at the tribunal. But Bertrand and Edith Russell were then exclusively in Penrhyndeudraeth, and I was dispatched there and worked with them one-on-one until the next session of the tribunal at the end of the year in Denmark. So you're all familiar with their residence in Wales at Plas Penrhyn. Bertrand and Edith were the people that I saw every day. And Lord Russell and I, dressed as he always did, all the pictures you see of him with a waistcoat, and I was more or less wearing what I've got on now, some kind of blazer and tie, and that's the way we dressed in the foundation in those days as well. And I guess the difference between us and Lord Russell at the time was he always had a three-piece suit, a waistcoat, which was in the tradition of his godfather, John Stuart Mill, would have been just as comfortable in the same attire. One of the challenges that Edith Russell raised immediately is what to call me. She said, "Well, we can't call you Russell. That's his name." I'm not going to comment on ostensive definition and so forth, but that she said, "And we can't call you Mr. Stetler. You're too young." So she said, "Well, we just call you Russell Stetler," which didn't really work, but we succeeded. So we had a routine. The Post was notoriously reliable in those days. It came a couple of times a day in Wales, came 3 times a day in London. And so we had a lot of communication with the foundation in London just through the ordinary post. That defined when I would sit down with Bertrand Russell each day around 11 o'clock, and we would go through the mail. We would go through the press, what we had listened to on the BBC, and we just had this regular ritual. He would smoke his pipe. He had tobacco freshly supplied by Fribourg and Traer tobacconists in London that had been there for a few hundred years. We would drink tea, and at some point when business was more or less concluded, Edith Russell would join us, and then they would open a bottle of red hackle, of which you've heard many times at many meetings of the society. So that would be the morning routine. We'd break for lunch. I lived in a little cottage not far from there, and Russell would rest, which I completely understand at my age, and then we would reconvene in the afternoon, and the ritual was similar. What's new information has come in the post? Drink tea, finish the red hackle, and they went through quite a lot of red hackle in that time. And I think Ken and I had a bit ourselves when Ken visited. He slept on the couch at my place in those days, so it's nice to renew my acquaintance with Ken after 59 years. We then went on to the final session of the tribunal in Roskilde, which, again, you'll hear about more fully from Layla. And at a certain point, these presentation of evidence went on for days and days, and then there were meetings every night where people discussed what had been testified to, and at one point, Sard disappeared for hours. Nobody admitted knowing where he was, and then he reappeared with a little manuscript in his own handwriting on the classic French quadrille paper, very, very neat. And that became the book sought on genocide. And its essential thesis was that genocide was inevitable when you had an army that was completely reliant on popular support. So that became the kind of concluding message of the Roskilde session. Russell sent a message which I read. We had been communicating through Chris Farley from the foundation. There were no faxes, no email. In those days, we just have rushed, no mobile phones. We would have rushed conversations, and believe me, calling from Sweden, getting an international operator, and saying, I want to call a very simple number. It's Penrhyndeudraeth 242. You can imagine how easily phone calls were made in those times. But that's how we communicated back and forth. And Russell would write a final message. Chris would convey it to me. I'd write it down in longhand and then read it to the assembled tribunal. So one of the fruits of Layla's research is that just as the United States government was dismissive, derisive, they were paying a lot of attention to what was going on. And even that could be said of the U.S. papers as well. The New York Times published terrible opinion pieces about Russell, but their actual correspondent, Dana Adam Schmidt, a veteran foreign correspondent, was very taken with the evidence that was presented. I think it really informed his view of Vietnam in a different way. And he wrote, I think, 10 articles that are really very, very powerful and very fair. So Layla has tracked how the administration of Lyndon Johnson, Dean Rusk, Robert McNamara were getting briefed constantly about what we were presenting. And she acknowledges that McNamara said that the inspiration for the Pentagon Papers was a dinner he'd had at Harvard several months earlier. But in fact, he launched the lengthy Vietnam Task Force study that became the Pentagon Papers just as we were meeting in May of 1967. So that's an unforeseen consequence. I know Daniel Ellsberg has been honored by this society as well, and his contribution was extremely important. And I wish we had had the opportunity to ask him about how the Russell Tribunal was viewed in the course of that research. In any event, here we are, all these years later, and the record stands. Russell's writings and the proceedings of the tribunal that bears his name are just this indelible record of what he was able to accomplish with his indefatigable efforts. He viewed the Vietnam conflict as the most significant one in the world at that time. He wrote about it. He launched this tribunal, and it continues to have reverberations. It has inspired other human rights commissions, non-governmental organizations, indeed expanded the whole concept of human rights. So for that, in addition to everything else that people have talked about over the last couple of days, this in itself was an invaluable contribution for which we will always be grateful. So thank you for this opportunity to be here. The person who really can share with you what we accumulated in evidence is my distinguished colleague and long-distance friend, Layla Beldrake from Sweden. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ross. Thank you. We're just going to have a slight break from the protocol thus far because the topics are so intimately connected, as Ross has implied a number of times. Layla is going to speak directly, and then there's going to be a joint Q&A at the end.